Jake the Crusher Morrison walked through the streets of London with the swagger of a man who had never lost a fight. At 28 years old, he was the reigning UFC middleweight champion, with a perfect record of 23 wins and 0 losses. His muscular frame and confident walk made it clear that he was someone who was used to being the most dangerous person in any room. Jake was in London for a massive promotional tour ahead of his upcoming title defense at Wembley Stadium. The fight was expected to draw over 80,000 fans and generate millions in pay-per-view revenue. Every sports magazine in the world was calling him the most dominant fighter of his generation. "This city's got nothing on Vegas," Jake muttered too. His manager, Tony Ricci, as they walked toward Buckingham Palace. "These British fighters are soft compared to what we deal with back home." Tony, a seasoned fight promoter who had worked with champions for 20 years, shook his head. "Jake, we're here to promote the fight and respect the local culture. Remember, you're representing American MMA to a whole new audience." "Relax, Tony. I know how to handle myself. These people should be honored to have a real champion visiting their little kingdom." Jake had agreed to do a photo shoot near the palace gates for a major sports magazine. The photographer wanted to capture the contrast between American fighting prowess and British royal tradition. Jake saw it as another opportunity to show off his dominance and intimidate his upcoming opponent. Standing at his post near the palace entrance was Lance Corporal James Mitchell of the Coldstream Guards, one of the most elite infantry regiments. In the British Army, James was 30 years old, had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, and had been selected for the prestigious Queen's Guard duty based on his exceptional military record. James wore the traditional red tunic and tall black bearskin hat that millions of tourists recognized. But beneath the ceremonial uniform was a soldier who had survived some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world. His calm professional demeanor came from years of facing life-and-death situations with courage and discipline. The photo shoot began, with Jake posing in various fighting stances near the palace gates. He shadowboxed for the cameras, flexed his muscles, and made sure every shot emphasized his physical dominance and aggressive attitude. "Get some shots of me next to one of these guards," Jake called out to the photographer. "I want people to see the difference between a real fighter and someone who just stands around looking pretty." Tony looked uncomfortable. "Jake, maybe we should keep some distance. These guards are active military personnel." "Active military?" Jake laughed loudly. "Tony, look at them. They're like toy soldiers. All ceremony, no substance. I could probably take on 3 of them at once." Several tourists began gathering to watch the photo shoot. Recognizing Jake from his recent appearances on sports shows and social media, Jake loved the attention and started playing to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced in his booming voice, "you're looking at the most dangerous man in combat sports today, undefeated, undisputed, and unbeatable." Your James remained perfectly still at his post, his eyes focused straight ahead as his training required. He had dealt with boastful tourists before, but something about Jake's aggressive energy was different. This wasn't just typical tourist behavior. This felt like someone looking for a confrontation. Jake noticed James's stoic composure and interpreted it as weakness. In the MMA world, psychological intimidation was as important as physical skill, and Jake was a master at breaking down opponents mentally before fights. "Hey guard," Jake called out, moving closer to James's position. "You ever been in a real fight? I mean, not marching around in parades, but actual combat?" James continued to stare straight ahead, maintaining the discipline that was expected of the Queen's Guard. His military training had taught him to ignore provocations and maintain his post no matter what distractions occurred around him. Jake took the lack of response as confirmation of his assumption that the guards were just for show. He had spent years studying his opponents, looking for signs of weakness or intimidation, and he thought he had found both in James's silence. "This is perfect," Jake said to the photographer. "Get some shots of me showing this guard what real strength looks like." The photographer looked uncertain.
Jake.
"I don't think we should involve the guards in the shoot. They're not supposed to interact with civilians." "Don't worry about it," Jake replied dismissively. "Not going to hurt him. I just want to demonstrate the difference between real combat training and playing dress-up. Tony stepped forward. Sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond a simple photo shoot, Jake, we need to respect their protocols. Let's just stick to the original plan. But Jake was already moving closer to James, his competitive instincts fully engaged. In his mind, this was no different from the psychological warfare he used before fights to get into his opponents' heads. What Jake didn't know was that James had survived 3 tours of duty in active combat zones, had been trained in advanced hand-to-hand combat by military instructors, and had faced far more dangerous opponents than any MMA fighter. His stillness wasn't weakness. It was the calm of a professional soldier who knew exactly how to handle threats. Jake raised his hands in what looked like a playful fighting stance, but his eyes showed the intensity of someone who was serious about demonstrating his superiority. The crowd of tourists grew larger, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. "Come on, guard," Jake taunted. "Show me what you've got. Let's see if all that military training is worth anything against a real fighter." James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his position. However, his mind was already calculating distances, angles, and potential responses if this situation escalated from verbal provocation to physical confrontation. Jake made the decision that would change both of their lives forever. Jake stepped forward and grabbed James by the shoulders, attempting to execute a takedown maneuver that had worked against countless MMA opponents. In the octagon, this move would have been the beginning of a dominant grappling sequence that usually ended with his opponent tapping out. But James wasn't an MMA opponent bound by sporting rules and referee supervision. He was a combat veteran who had been trained to respond to physical attacks with swift, decisive action. The moment Jake's hands made contact, James's military training took over. In one fluid motion, he broke Jake's grip, pivoted on his heel, and used Jake's own forward momentum against him. Before Jake could react, he found himself airborne, then crashing hard onto the pavement in front of hundreds of shocked tourists. The sound of Jake hitting the ground echoed off the palace. Walls like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped collectively, and several people screamed in surprise. Jake lay on his back, stunned and trying to understand what had just happened. James immediately returned to his guard position, standing at perfect attention as if nothing had occurred. His face showed no emotion, no satisfaction, no anger, just the professional composure of a soldier who had neutralized a threat and returned to his duties. Jake slowly got to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and confusion. Professional fights, he had never been thrown so effortlessly. The technique James had used was something Jake didn't even recognize. It wasn't from any martial art he had studied. "What the hell was that?" Jake demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of shock and fury. James continued to stare straight ahead. Offering no response or acknowledgement that anything had happened, the tourists began pulling out their phones. Recording what they sensed was a historic moment. The undefeated UFC champion had just been effortlessly tossed by a palace guard who acted like it was routine. Tony rushed over to Jake, his face pale with panic. "Jake, are you hurt? What were you thinking?" "He sucker punched me," Jake shouted, though everyone who had seen the encounter knew that wasn't true. "He didn't punch you," called out an elderly British gentleman from the crowd. "I grabbed him first, and he defended himself. We all saw it." Jake looked around at the faces in the crowd, searching for support but finding only disapproval and amusement. These people weren't impressed by his MMA credentials. They were embarrassed for him. "This isn't over," Jake said, pointing at James. "You caught me off guard, but that won't happen again." James remained motionless, but several other guards had appeared, having been alerted by the commotion. Palace security officers were also approaching, their expressions serious and professional. "Sir," said a security officer to Jake, "I'm going to need you to step away from the guard and explain what happened here." Jake's manager, Tony, quickly intervened. "Officer, this was just a misunderstanding. My client was posing for photos and things got out of hand." "Out of hand?" The security officer looked at Jake with disapproval. "Your client physically accosted a member of the Queen's Guard. That's a serious offense. confidence crumbling as he realized the legal implications of what he had done. Assaulting a royal guard wasn't just embarrassing, it was a crime that could result in arrest and international headlines that would destroy his carefully crafted image. "Look, I was just demonstrating some techniques for the photographer," Jake said desperately. "I didn't mean any disrespect." Sir, you grabbed a soldier who was performing his official duties. Your intent doesn't change the fact that you've committed assault." The photographer, who had been documenting the entire incident, looked nervous. "I got it all on camera." "Should I delete the photos?" "No," said the security officer firmly. "Those photos are evidence now." Jake's mind raced as he tried to understand how his simple photo opportunity had turned into a legal nightmare. He had come to London as the conquering champion, expecting easy publicity and respect. Instead, he was facing arrest in front of hundreds of witnesses who had watched him get humiliated by a guard, who hadn't even broken a sweat. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through the tourist area that something dramatic had happened. People were already uploading videos to social media, and Jake could see his carefully managed reputation unraveling in real time. Officer Tony pleaded, "Surely, we can work this out without involving the legal system. My client is a professional athlete, and any criminal charges would ruin his career." The security officer looked unimpressed. "Your client should have considered that before he assaulted a member of Her Majesty's forces." Jake stared at James, who continued to stand at perfect attention, completely unaffected by the chaos swirling around him. The guard's calm professionalism only made Jake's loss of control look worse by comparison. "Who trained you?" Jake asked James desperately, hoping for some explanation that would make sense of what had happened. James remained silent, but another guard stepped forward. "Lance Corporal Mitchell served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's trained in military combat techniques that aren't taught in sporting environments." The simple statement hit Jake like another throw to the pavement. This wasn't just a ceremonial guard. This was a combat veteran who had faced life-and-death situations that made MMA fights look like games. Jake realized that his entire understanding of strength and combat had just been challenged by someone whose experience made his octagon victories seem insignificant. What happened next would force Jake to confront the difference between fighting for sport and training for survival. Within an hour, videos of Jake's humiliation were spreading across social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag champion down was trending. Millions of people were watching the UFC champion get effortlessly thrown by a stoic British guard. Jake sat in a police station interview room, still trying to process what had happened. His expensive clothes were dirty from hitting the pavement, and his pride was even more bruised than his body. Detective Inspector Michael Harrison entered the room, carrying a thick folder and a tablet showing social media feeds.
"Hey, Mr. Morrison."
"I'm sure you're aware that your encounter with Lance Corporal Mitchell has become quite famous in the past hour." Jake looked at the tablet screen showing millions of views and thousands of comments mocking his performance. "This is insane."
"Yeah."
"Barely touched the guy." "Mr. Morrison, we have video evidence from multiple angles showing you initiating physical contact with a member of the Queen's Guard. In British law, constitutes assault on a military officer. But I'm a professional fighter. I was just showing some techniques." Detective Harrison looked unimpressed. "Our professional credentials don't give you permission to assault soldiers." "Mr. Morrison, if anything, they make your actions more concerning." Jake realized that his fighting background, which he had always seen as his greatest asset, was now being used against him as evidence that he should have known better. "What kind of punishment are we talking about here?" Jake asked nervously. "Assault on a military officer can carry a sentence of up to 6 months in prison, plus substantial fines." Given the international attention this incident has received, the Crown Prosecution Service will likely pursue the case aggressively. Jake felt sick. His upcoming title fight was just 6 weeks away, and any criminal charges would force the cancellation of the biggest payday of his career. "Detective, surely there's some way to resolve this without destroying my career. I made a mistake, but nobody was seriously hurt." Detective Harrison consulted his notes. Lance Corporal Mitchell has declined to press additional charges beyond the standard assault charge. However, he has made an unusual request. "What kind of request?" He's asked to speak with you personally before any plea agreements are finalized. Looked confused. He wants to talk to me? Why? I honestly don't know, Mr. Morrison. Lance Corporal Mitchell is not required to meet with you. His request surprised everyone involved. But he specifically said he wanted to understand why you did what you did. 2 hours later, Jake found himself in a small conference room at the police station, waiting nervously for the man who had humiliated him in front of hundreds of people. When James Mitchell entered the room, still in his guard uniform but without the ceremonial hat, Jake was struck by how normal he looked. "Mr. Morrison," James said, extending his hand politely, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Jake shook the offered hand, surprised by James's calm demeanor. "I figured I owed you that much after what happened. Please, sit down. I wanted to talk to you before this situation goes any further." Jake sat across from James, studying his face for signs of anger or satisfaction, but finding neither. "Look, I want to apologize for what I did. I was showing off for the cameras, and I crossed a line. I appreciate that, Mr. Morrison, but I'm more interested in understanding why you felt the need to physically confront me in the first place." The question caught Jake off guard. He had expected anger, demands for punishment, or perhaps gloating about the viral videos. Instead, James seemed genuinely curious about his motivations. I guess I wanted to prove that my training was superior to yours. In my world, physical dominance is how you earn respect." James nodded thoughtfully. "And how did that work out for you?" Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment. "Obviously not well. I've never been thrown like that in my life. Mr. Morrison, can I tell you something about the training that toy soldiers like me receive?" Jake nodded, genuinely interested. Despite his humiliation, military combat training isn't about winning matches or impressing crowds. It's about staying alive in situations where failure means death. Every technique I know was developed by people who needed to survive real combat, not score points with judges. James leaned forward slightly. "When you grabbed me today, my body reacted the same way it would if an enemy combatant had tried to attack me in Helmand Province. The difference is that in Afghanistan, I might have had to use lethal force." The implications of James's words hit Jake like a physical blow. He had been treating a combat veteran like a sparring partner in a gym. Not understanding that James's training came from a completely different world, "I had no idea," Jake said quietly. "I thought you guys were just for show. Many tourists think that. But the Queen's Guard consists of active soldiers from elite infantry regiments. We're selected for this duty based on our combat records and military excellence." James paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Mr. Morrison, I don't want to see your career destroyed over a moment of poor judgment. But I think you need to understand something important about what happened today." "What's that?" "You're incredibly skilled at what you do. Your MMA record is impressive, and you've obviously worked hard to become a champion. But what you do is sport, governed by rules and refereed by officials. What I've been trained for is war. Ain't." Jake felt humbled by James's explanation. "So you're saying I never had a chance?" James smiled slightly. "I'm saying you brought a sport mindset to a combat situation. That's like challenging a Formula One driver to a race while you're riding a bicycle. Different tools for different purposes." Jake realized that his entire worldview about strength and fighting had just been fundamentally challenged by this quiet. James said next would change Jake's perspective on everything he thought he knew about being a fighter. James leaned back in his chair and studied Jake's face carefully. "Mr. Morrison, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll answer honestly." "Sure, go ahead." Jake expected a question about legal proceedings or public apologies, not this personal inquiry. "What do you mean? I mean, what drove you to dedicate your life to becoming the best fighter in the world? Was it money, fame, something else?" Jake thought for a moment, surprised to find himself being completely honest with someone he had just assaulted. "I guess, right. I wanted to prove I was strong. I grew up getting bullied, and I never wanted to feel powerless again." James nodded understandingly. "That makes sense. A lot of soldiers have similar backgrounds. We wanted to protect people and never feel helpless in dangerous situations. But you and I took very different paths to get strong. Exactly. And that's what I want to talk to you about. James pulled out his phone and showed Jake some of the social media comments about their encounter. Look at these responses, Mr. Morrison. What do you see? Jake read through the comments, his face growing more uncomfortable with each one. People making fun of me, saying, I got what I deserved, calling me arrogant but look deeper. What are people really responding to? Jake studied the comments more carefully. Many of them weren't just mocking his defeat, they were criticizing his behavior toward James before the physical confrontation. They're angry that I was disrespectful to you, Jake realized. Right, people aren't just laughing because you lost a fight, or offended that you treated a soldier with disrespect while he was serving his country. James put his phone away. Mr. Morrison, in your world, trash talking and intimidation are part of the entertainment. Fans expect fighters to be aggressive and boastful. But you brought that attitude into a different context, where those behaviors are seen as disrespectful and inappropriate. Jake felt a dawning realization about why his usual tactics had backfired so spectacularly. I treated you like an opponent when you were just doing your job. Exactly. More than that, you assumed that, because I wasn't responding to your provocations, I was weak. In military culture, self-control and discipline are signs of strength, not weakness. Jake looked at James with new respect. So when you stayed calm while I was trying to intimidate you, you were actually demonstrating superior mental discipline. That's one way to look at it. But Mr. Morrison, I want you to understand something else. The technique I used on you today, that wasn't about proving I was stronger than you. What was it about? It was about ending a threat quickly and efficiently. In combat situations, you don't have time for extended fights. You neutralize the danger and move on to the next threat. James's explanation made Jake realize how different their training philosophies were. So while I've been learning to fight for 15 minutes in an octagon, you've been learning to end conflicts in seconds. Different tools for different purposes, James repeated. Your skills are impressive for sport. Mine are designed for survival. Jake felt humbled by the comparison. James, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have you ever killed anyone? James was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, I've served in combat zones where I had to make difficult decisions. To protect my fellow soldiers and innocent civilians, I don't discuss the specifics of those experiences. The weight of James's words hit Jake hard. While he had been fighting for belts and prize money, James had been making life-and-death decisions in real combat situations. I feel like an idiot, Jake said quietly. I spent years thinking I was the toughest guy in the world because I could beat other athletes in a controlled environment. Mr. Morrison, you are tough. Your dedication, training, and achievements are remarkable. But toughness isn't just about physical ability. It's about character, discipline, and how you treat other people. James leaned forward again. That's why I asked to meet with you today. I wanted to see if you were capable of learning from this experience. What do you mean? You could have come in here making excuses, blaming me for your embarrassment, or demanding special treatment because you're famous. Instead, you've listened, asked thoughtful questions, and shown genuine remorse. Jake felt a spark of hope. Does that mean you might not press charges? I'm willing to discuss alternatives, but only if you're committed to making real changes, not just managing your public image. What kind of changes? James smiled for the first time since they had met. Mr. Morrison, what if I told you that you could become a much better fighter by learning some of the discipline and respect that military training teaches? Jake looked intrigued but confused. You mean you'd be willing to train with me? I'd be willing to teach you that real strength comes from self-control, respect for others, and understanding that your abilities come with responsibilities. I don't understand. Why would you want to help me after what I did? James's answer would surprise Jake and begin a transformation that neither man could have predicted. James looked directly at Jake, his expression serious but not unkind. Mr. Morrison, I want to help you because I see potential in you that you don't see in yourself. Jake felt confused. What kind of potential? I just got humiliated in front of the whole world. Got humiliated because you made a mistake based on ignorance, not because you're weak or worthless. There's a difference. James stood up and walked to the small window in the conference room. When I was deployed in Afghanistan, I met a lot of young soldiers who came in thinking they were tough because they could lift weights or win bar fights. Most of them had to learn the hard way that real combat requires much more than physical strength. What does it require? Mental discipline, emotional control, respect for your enemy, and understanding that your actions have consequences for other people, not just yourself. Jake considered James's words. You think I lack those qualities? Think you've spent so much time developing your physical abilities that you've neglected other aspects of strength? Today's incident proves that. James returned to his seat. But here's what impressed me about our conversation when I challenged your assumptions. You listened instead of getting defensive. When I explained military training, you asked thoughtful questions instead of dismissing what you didn't understand. So, you think I can learn these other kinds of strength? I think you have to learn them if you want to be truly great, not just successful. Jake felt a stirring of curiosity mixed with humility. What did you have in mind? James pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. There's a program for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. They teach leadership skills, conflict resolution, and community service. I think you could benefit from working with them. Jake looked at the card skeptically. You want me to do community service with military veterans? I want you to learn from people who understand what real service means. Your fighting skills are impressive, but what are you using them for besides personal gain? The question hit Jake harder than James's throw had. He realized he had never considered using his abilities for anything beyond championship belts and prize money. James, I have to ask, why are you being so generous with someone who assaulted you? James smiled sadly. 'Cause 6 years ago I was a lot like you. What do you mean? When I first joined the army, I thought I was tough because I could beat up most people in my hometown. Had the same arrogant attitude you showed today? Jake leaned forward with interest. What changed? My first combat deployment. I learned very quickly that individual toughness means nothing if you can't work as part of a team. Follow orders and put other people's safety before your own ego. James paused, seeming to remember something painful. I nearly got 3 of my fellow soldiers killed because I thought I knew better than my commanding officer during a patrol. My arrogance almost cost people their lives. What happened? My sergeant pulled me aside and gave me a choice. Learn humility and discipline, or be transferred to a unit where my attitude couldn't endanger other soldiers. Jake realized that James was offering him a similar choice. Learn and grow, or face the full consequences of his actions alone. If I agree to this program, what happens to the criminal charges? If you complete the program successfully and demonstrate genuine change in your attitudes and behavior, I'll recommend that the charges be reduced to community service and public apology. Jake felt relief wash over him, but James wasn't finished. However, there are conditions. First, you complete the entire program, not just the minimum requirements. Second, you issue a genuine public apology that acknowledges your mistakes without making excuses. Third, you use your platform as a champion to promote respect and discipline, not just aggression. And if I don't complete the program, then I'll testify in court about exactly what happened today, and you'll face the full legal consequences. Jake studied James's face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of trick or revenge. Instead, he saw a man offering him a chance at redemption that he probably didn't deserve. James, can I ask you something? Do you really think I can change? Or are you just being nice because you feel sorry for me? James's answer was immediate and firm. Mr. Morrison, if I thought you were hopeless, I wouldn't waste my time on this conversation. I've seen men transform themselves from selfish individuals into leaders who inspire others, but it requires genuine commitment to becoming better. What kind of commitment? The kind that means admitting your mistakes publicly, working with people who might not respect you initially, and putting service to others ahead of your own ego.
Ow.
Jake felt both excited and terrified by the prospect. His entire identity was built around being the best fighter, the undefeated champion. James was asking him to risk that identity for the possibility of becoming something better. If I do this program and change the way people see me, what happens to my fighting career? James smiled. Mr. Morrison, what if I told you that the greatest fighters in history weren't just physically strong, but also men of character and discipline. What if becoming a better person actually made you a better fighter? Jake had never considered that possibility. He had always seen personal growth and competitive success as separate goals. You really think that's possible? I think a fighter who combines physical skill with genuine character and discipline would be unstoppable. Not just in the octagon, but in life. Jake realized that James was offering him something far more valuable than just avoiding criminal charges. He was offering a path to becoming the kind of man worthy of being called a true champion. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in front of a group of wounded veterans at a rehabilitation center in Birmingham. Wearing a simple black t-shirt instead of his usual flashy fight gear, the UFC championship belt sat in a glass case in his Las Vegas home, while he focused on something far more challenging than any opponent he had ever faced. "Before I met Lance Corporal Mitchell," Jake said to the group of 20 veterans, "I thought strength was about dominating other people. I thought respect had to be taken by force." The veterans listened with interest. Many of them had initially been skeptical when Jake first arrived at the program, having seen the viral video of his humiliation at Buckingham Palace. But over the past 6 months, he had earned their respect through consistent actions rather than words. "James taught me something that no MMA coach ever could," Jake continued. "He taught me that real strength comes from self-control, and real respect is earned through service to others." Jake's transformation had not been easy. The first month of the veterans program had been brutal for someone accustomed to being treated like a celebrity. He was assigned to basic tasks: cleaning equipment, serving meals, and listening to stories from men and women who had sacrificed far more than he ever had. Initially, some veterans had tested his commitment, making sarcastic comments about the tough guy who got schooled by a palace guard. Jake had to swallow his pride and prove through patience and hard work that his commitment was genuine. The breakthrough came when Jake met Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a female veteran who had lost her right leg to an IED in Iraq. She had initially been hostile toward him, seeing him as another privileged athlete looking for positive publicity. What can a fighter who plays games for money possibly teach people who fought real wars? She had challenged him during his second week. Instead of getting defensive, Jake had asked her to teach him about real combat leadership. That conversation had led to hours of discussions about sacrifice, duty, and what it meant to put others before yourself. Now, 6 months later, Jake regularly volunteered at the center and had helped raise over $500,000 for veteran support programs. He had also completely changed his approach to fighting and public appearances. Jake called out Corporal Tom Williams, a veteran with PTSD who had become one of Jake's closest friends in the program. "Tell them about your upcoming fight." Jake smiled. His title defense at Wembley Stadium was just 2 weeks away, but his approach to the fight was completely different from any previous bout. "I'm still going to compete at the highest level," Jake said. "But now I understand that. Being a champion means more than just winning fights. It means being someone that young people can look up to, someone who represents the best qualities of strength and discipline." He gestured around the room. "Every person in this room has taught me something about what real courage looks like. You've shown me that the strongest people aren't those who never fall down. They're the ones who get back up and help others do the same." James Mitchell entered the room just then, still in his military uniform but off duty. He had become a regular visitor to the center, monitoring Jake's progress and eventually becoming something like a mentor and friend. "How's our former troublemaker doing?" James asked with a warm smile. The veterans laughed. Jake's transformation from arrogant athlete to humble volunteer had become something of a success story that the program used to recruit other participants. "James," Jake said, standing up to greet him, "I was just telling everyone about the fight next week. I wanted to invite all of you to attend as my guests." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Jake had arranged for the entire program to attend the fight, with proceeds from their section going to veteran support organizations. "But more importantly," Jake continued, "I wanted to announce something that James helped me realize." Around the room at the faces of men and women who had taught him more about strength than any gym ever could. "Win or lose at Wembley, this fight will be my last title defense for a while. I'm taking a year off from competition to expand this program to other cities. Working full-time with veterans and at-risk youth. The announcement surprised everyone, including James. Jake's career was at its peak, and stepping away from competition would cost him millions in potential earnings. "Jake," James said quietly, "are you sure about this? You've worked your entire life to get where you are?" "That's exactly the point," Jake replied. "I spent my whole life working to become the best fighter in the world, and I achieved that goal. But what good is being the best if you're not using that platform to make the world better?" Sergeant Rodriguez wheeled her chair forward. "Jake, when you first came here, I thought you were just another celebrity doing community service for publicity. But watching you these past months, seeing you listen to our stories and genuinely care about our struggles, that's changed my opinion of what a champion can be." Jake felt tears forming in his eyes. 6 months ago, the only validation he cared about came from crowds cheering his victories. Now, the respect of these veterans meant more to him than any championship belt. "Maria, you and everyone here taught me that real victories aren't about defeating opponents. They're about lifting other people up." James approached Jake and extended his hand. "Mr. Morrison, I have to say, you've exceeded every expectation I had when we first met." As they shook hands, Jake remembered the moment 6 months earlier when he had grabbed James's shoulders, expecting easy dominance. Now he understood that James's calm professionalism that day hadn't been weakness, it had been the kind of strength that Jake was only beginning to learn. "James, I need to ask you something," Jake said. "Do you think I would have learned these lessons if you had just let the legal system handle what I did?" James considered the question carefully. "Maybe eventually, but probably not as quickly, and definitely not as deeply. Sometimes the best way to help someone who's made a mistake is to show them a better path forward instead of just punishing them for the path they chose." 2 weeks later, Jake walked into Wembley Stadium for his title defense. But everything about his approach was different. Instead of trash-talking his opponent, he had spent the pre-fight interviews talking about respect, discipline, the importance of using success to help others. In the front rows sat the veterans from Birmingham, wearing matching t-shirts that read "Real Strength, Real Service." James Mitchell was there too, having been given special leave to attend. The fight itself was Jake's most dominant performance ever. His training had actually improved since beginning the veterans program, as the mental discipline and emotional control he had learned enhanced his physical abilities. He won by submission in the second round. But what happened after the victory would be remembered longer than the fight itself. Instead of his usual celebration, Jake immediately called for a microphone in the center of the octagon. The crowd of 80,000 people fell silent, curious about what their champion wanted to say. 6 months ago, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the stadium. "I was an undefeated fighter who thought strength meant dominating other people. Then I met a British soldier who taught me that real strength comes from self-discipline and service to others." He pointed toward the section where the veterans were sitting. "Those men and women taught me that being a true champion means using your platform to lift others up, not tear them down." Jake held up his championship belt. "This belt represents individual achievement. What I've learned is that individual achievement is meaningless unless it's used to benefit others." The crowd listened in amazement as their champion continued. "So I'm announcing tonight that I'm donating my fight purse from this event. All $2 million to organizations that support veterans and at-risk youth. And I'm challenging every athlete, every successful person to ask themselves, what are you doing with your success to make the world better?" The stadium erupted in the loudest ovation Jake had ever received. But this time it wasn't just for his fighting skills, it was for his character. After the event, Jake found James in the corridor, leading to the locker rooms. "Well," Jake said with a grin, "I think I finally understand what you meant about real strength." James smiled back. "Mr. Morrison, you've become exactly the kind of champion the world needs. Someone who wins, not just for himself, but for everyone who looks up to him. I couldn't have done it without someone showing me that there was a better way to be strong. And I couldn't have known it would work without someone brave enough to change everything about how he saw the world." As they walked together through the corridors of Wembley Stadium, Jake realized that his greatest victory hadn't happened in the octagon that night. It had happened 6 months earlier, in a police station conference room when a soldier he had assaulted chose to offer him redemption instead of revenge. The MMA champion, who had thought he could easily overpower a royal guard, had discovered that the strongest people are those who use their power to serve others. And in learning that lesson, he had become not just a better fighter, but a better man. The viral video of his humiliation would always exist on the internet, a reminder of his worst moment. But it was now balanced by something far more powerful: consistent evidence of who he had chosen to become afterward. It's sometimes our greatest defeats become the foundation for our most meaningful victories. And sometimes the people who humble us most completely are the ones who help us discover our true strength.